Some moments change everything: a knock at the door, a child's desperate cry, a choice between turning away or standing up. In the remote frontier mountains, a man lives alone in his cabin, far from the troubles of civilization. He left violence behind years ago, seeking only quiet and peace. But one cold evening, a little girl appears at his door, tears on her face, begging him to help her mama. Bad men are hurting her in town, and there's nobody else to turn to. What happens when a man who walked away from fighting decides some things are worth the cost? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jonas Reed had built his cabin with his own 2 hands. Timber by timber, in the high country of the Colorado Rockies, where the air stayed thin and the winters came early. That was 7 years ago, when he first decided that civilization had nothing left to offer him but memories he'd rather forget. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, with a creek running cold and clear just 30 yards from his front door. In the mornings, he could watch elk graze in the meadow below, and at night, the stars spread across the sky, so thick and bright, it seemed you could reach up and touch them. He was 58 years old now, though his body carried the wear of a man who'd lived harder than most. His hands were large and scarred, capable of splitting wood or skinning a deer with equal efficiency. His face was weathered like old leather, deeply lined around the eyes and mouth, with a thick beard gone mostly grey. He stood over 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of solid strength that comes, not from vanity but from necessity, the daily work of survival in a place that doesn't forgive weakness. Jonas lived by routine, because routine kept a man sane when he was alone. He rose with the sun, started his fire, and made coffee in a battered tin pot that had seen better days. Breakfast was usually cornmeal mush or bacon, if he smoked any recently. Then came the work, checking his trap lines in winter, tending his small garden in summer, chopping wood, mending whatever needed mending. He was a man who understood that idleness led to thinking, and thinking led to places he'd sworn not to go. The cabin itself was modest but well made, a single room with a stone fireplace at one end and his bed at the other. He'd built a small loft for storage, and shelves lined one wall, holding his few books, his tools, and the simple dishes he ate from. In one corner sat a hand-carved rocking chair, the only piece of furniture he'd taken real time with, working the wood smooth and fitting the joints with patience. He'd made it during his first winter here, something to occupy his hands during the long, dark evenings. Sometimes he'd sit in it and rock slowly, watching the fire, letting his mind go quiet. He didn't own much, but what he owned was quality, built to last. His rifle was a Winchester .73, well-maintained and accurate. His knife had been his father's, the handle worn smooth by 2 generations of use. He had traps, a good axe, a saw, rope, and all the small tools a man needed to live independent of the world below. Every few months, he'd make the 8-mile trek down to Elkridge Valley to trade furs or venison for coffee, salt, flour, and ammunition. He spoke little during these visits, conducted his business, and returned to his mountain. The townspeople knew him only as the Mountain Man, or sometimes Reed, if they remembered his name from the Trading Post ledger. They didn't know what he'd been before, and he preferred it that way. He wasn't hiding exactly, but he wasn't advertising either. His past was his own business, and he meant to keep it that way. But the past has a way of living inside a man, whether he wants it to or not. Jonas had been a lawman once, a marshal in Wyoming Territory, back when his hair was still dark and his heart was still full of notions about justice and doing right by people. He'd worn the badge for 12 years, and he'd been good at it. Fair but firm, the kind of man people respected. He had a wife then, Clara, who had hair the color of wheat and a smile that could make him forget whatever troubles the day had brought. And they had a daughter, Rachel, who was 7 years old and full of questions about everything under the sun. He'd lost them both to cholera in the summer of 1871, while he was 3 days' ride away chasing a pair of horse thieves who'd killed a rancher. By the time he got word and rode back, Clara was already buried and Rachel was dying. He held his little girl's hand while fever consumed her, and she looked up at him with confused eyes and asked why he hadn't been there to protect her. She died that evening, and something in Jonas died with her. He'd turned in his badge a month later. Couldn't wear it anymore, couldn't pretend that law and order meant anything, when the people he was supposed to protect most, his own family, had died while he was off playing hero for strangers. He drifted for a while, working odd jobs, drinking more than he should, until finally he'd ended up here in these mountains. Here he didn't have to protect anyone. Here he didn't have to carry the weight of other people's troubles. Here he could just be, and for 7 years it had worked. The solitude had become a kind of companion, and the silence of the mountains had slowly filled in the hollow places inside him. He wasn't happy, he didn't figure he deserved to be, but he'd found something like peace. He'd made a promise to himself when he built this cabin. No more violence, no more fighting other people's battles, no more wearing himself down, trying to hold back the tide of human meanness. He was done with all of that. It was late October, and winter was coming on. The aspens had turned gold and dropped their leaves, and there was frost on the ground most mornings. Jonas had spent the day cutting wood, stacking it against the north wall of the cabin, where it would stay dry. His woodpile was substantial now, enough to see him through even a hard winter. He felt the satisfaction that comes from being prepared, from knowing he could weather whatever the mountains threw at him. As evening fell, he went inside and lit his lantern, then started a fire in the fireplace. He had a haunch of venison hanging in his smokehouse, and he cut off a portion to roast for supper. While it cooked, he sat in his rocking chair and tried to read from one of his books, a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman that Clara had given him years ago. He didn't understand all of it, but some of the words stirred something in him, reminded him that beauty still existed in the world, even if he'd chosen to step back from it. The knocking came just as full darkness settled over the mountains. 3 sharp raps on his door, urgent and insistent. Jonas looked up from his book, frowning. In 7 years, no one had knocked on his door. No one even knew exactly where his cabin was, except in the most general sense. Trappers and hunters kept to their own territories, and the townspeople had no reason to come this far up the mountain. He rose slowly, setting the book aside, and walked to the door. His hand instinctively moved toward where his rifle leaned against the wall. Old habits, never quite forgotten. But he didn't pick it up. Instead, he lifted the latch and pulled the door open. A little girl stood on his porch, no more than 7 or 8 years old, her dress torn and dirty, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Her hair was tangled with bits of leaves and twigs, and she was breathing hard, like she'd been running. In her small hand she clutched a blue ribbon, torn and muddy. When she saw him, her eyes went wide with a mixture of hope and fear. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed forward. Jonas caught her before she hit the porch boards, his arms going around her small frame instinctively. She was light as a bird, trembling all over and cold, so cold. She looked up at him with eyes that had seen something no child should ever see, and her lips moved, trying to form words. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Please, mister, they're hurting my mama. You have to help her, please." And just like that, Jonas Reed's 7 years of peace came to an end. Jonas carried the girl inside and set her down gently in his rocking chair, wrapping his blanket around her shaking shoulders. She was in shock, he could see that plainly. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow and rapid. He poured water from his pitcher into a tin cup and held it to her lips. She drank greedily, some of it spilling down her chin. "Easy now," he said quietly. "Take your time. You're safe here." The girl nodded, clutching the cup with both hands. Up close, he could see scratches on her arms and legs, her feet bare and blooded. She'd run a long way through rough country. Whatever had happened, it had been bad enough to send a child fleeing into the wilderness alone. He pulled up his wooden stool and sat facing her, keeping his voice calm and steady. "What's your name, child?" "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Hartford. I'm Jonas. You ran a long way to get here, didn't you?" She nodded, tears welling up fresh in her eyes. 8 miles. Mama told me about you. She said there was a man who lived up in the mountains, all alone. She said you used to be a lawman, that you were brave. I didn't know where else to go. Jonas felt something tighten in his chest. 8 miles through mountain wilderness at night, alone. This child had more courage than most grown men he'd known. Tell me what happened, Sarah. Take your time, but I need to know. The words came tumbling out then, between sobs and gasps for breath. Sarah and her mother, Emma Hartford, lived in Elkridge Valley. Emma was a widow. Her husband had died in a mining accident 3 years back. She supported them by taking in sewing and mending, doing laundry for the better-off families in town. They had a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy, but it was theirs. 3 days ago, men had ridden into Elkridge Valley, 6 of them, hard-looking and heavily armed. They'd taken over the saloon, and word spread quickly that they were the Dalton gang, Cyrus Dalton and his 2 brothers, Cole and Vernon, along with 3 hired guns whose names Sarah didn't know. They'd been causing trouble up and down the territory, the kind of men who took what they wanted and killed anyone who objected. They started taking things from people, Sarah said, her small hands gripping the torn blue ribbon. Food, money, whatever they wanted. Papa Ridley, that's the sheriff, he told everyone to just give them what they asked for. Said it was easier to let them have their way and hope they'd move on. Jonas's jaw tightened. Sheriff Tom Ridley. He'd met the man once or twice during his supply runs. Ridley was in his 40s, soft around the middle, the kind of lawman who got elected because he was friendly and non-threatening, not the kind who'd stand up to real trouble. Mama was in the general store yesterday, Sarah continued, her voice getting smaller, buying flour. Mr. Cyrus, the big one, the leader, he came in and started talking to her, saying things that made her uncomfortable. He tried to touch her and she pulled away, told him to leave her alone. The girl's tears were flowing freely now, and Jonas handed her a handkerchief. She wiped her face but kept talking as if she needed to get it all out. He got angry, real angry. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her outside into the street. Everyone was watching, but nobody helped. Nobody. He hit her, Mr. Jonas, hit her so hard she fell down. Then he kept hitting her while she was on the ground. I tried to stop him, I tried. Her voice broke completely. Jonas reached out and put his hand gently on her shoulder. I know you did, Sarah, I know. Mama yelled at me to run, she said. Told me to run and find help, so I did. I ran and ran, and when I looked back they were dragging her into the saloon. Mr. Cyrus said she needed to learn respect, said he was going to teach her proper. The girl looked up at Jonas with eyes that begged him to make sense of a world that had suddenly become incomprehensibly cruel. Why didn't anyone help her? Why didn't Papa Ridley stop them? Jonas had no good answer for that. He'd seen it before, during his years as a marshal. Good people paralyzed by fear, unwilling to risk themselves even to save their neighbors. It was the way of things when evil men came to town. Most folks would rather look the other way and hope the storm passed them by. Your mama was very brave, he said finally, and smart. She knew you were too little to help her fight, so she made sure you got away safe. That's what a good mother does. But we have to help her now, Sarah pleaded. Please, Mr. Jonas, they're going to hurt her worse. I heard Mr. Cyrus tell his brother that he was going to keep Mama, make her his. What does that mean? Jonas felt cold fury settle into his bones. He knew exactly what it meant. Men like Cyrus Dalton took women the way they took money or horses, because they could, because no one would stop them. Emma Hartford was alone in the world, except for her daughter, with no husband or father or brothers to stand up for her. That made her easy prey. Your mama is still in the saloon? He asked. Sarah nodded. I think so. I ran right after it happened. That was this afternoon. Jonas stood and walked to his window, looking out into the darkness. The smart thing would be to wait until morning, ride down to Elkridge Valley, and assess the situation. But morning might be too late. A lot could happen to a woman in the hands of men like that. A lot probably already had. He turned back to Sarah. Listen to me carefully. I'm going to help your mama. But you need to stay here where it's safe. There's food in that box there, and the fire will keep you warm. You understand? You're going to bring her back? The hope in her voice nearly broke him. "I'm going to do everything I can," he said. "I promise you that." It was the same promise he'd made to others years ago when he wore a badge. The same promise he'd failed to keep to his own daughter. But what choice did he have now? This child had run 8 miles through the wilderness because she believed he could help. Her mother was suffering at the hands of evil men because no one else would stand up to them. Jonas walked to the corner where he kept his weapons. He hadn't touched them in 7 years, had barely looked at them. His rifle hung on pegs driven into the wall. His pistol wrapped in oilcloth in a wooden box, his knife in its sheath beside them. He'd sworn he was done with violence, done with fighting, done with all of it, but some things couldn't be walked away from. Some things demanded a response, whether a man wanted to give it or not. He lifted the rifle down and checked it over. Still in good condition, he'd maintained it even if he hadn't used it. The Winchester felt familiar in his hands, like meeting an old friend you'd parted with on bad terms. The pistol was a Colt Peacemaker, worn but reliable. He strapped the gun belt around his waist, feeling the weight of it settle against his hip. The knife went into his boot. Sarah watched him with wide eyes. "Are you going to kill them?" Jonas considered the question. "I'm going to get your mama back safe, whatever that takes." He gathered a few supplies, rope, matches, a canteen of water. Then he opened the wooden box beneath his bed and pulled out something he'd buried even deeper than his weapons. It was wrapped in cloth, and when he unfolded it, a tarnished badge gleamed dully in the firelight. Marshal Jonas Reed, Wyoming Territory. He'd thrown it in this box the day he came to the mountains, told himself he'd never look at it again. But he looked at it now and felt the weight of what it represented, not just authority, but responsibility. The responsibility to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He didn't pin it on, not yet. But he slipped it into his pocket. "Try to sleep," he told Sarah. "I'll be back before you know it." She nodded, though he could see the fear in her eyes, fear that he might not come back, or worse, that he'd come back without her mother. Jonas stepped out into the cold October night and began preparing for the 8-mile journey down the mountain. The stars were bright overhead, and the air smelled of pine and coming snow. His breath made clouds in front of his face. He'd spent 7 years trying to leave this life behind. 7 years of peace and solitude, of living with his ghosts and his regrets. 7 years telling himself he'd earned the right to step back, to let the world handle its own problems. But there was a little girl in his cabin who'd run 8 miles through the dark because she believed he could help. And there was a woman suffering in that town because no one else would stand up for her. Sometimes a man doesn't get to choose his path. Sometimes it chooses him. Jonas tightened his gun belt, picked up his rifle, and started down the mountain toward Elkridge Valley. Toward whatever waited for him there. Toward the violence he'd sworn he'd left behind, but had apparently been waiting for him all along. The night was cold and clear, and his footsteps were steady on the trail. He didn't look back at the cabin, at the life he was leaving behind. He only looked forward, toward the town below, toward the confrontation that waited. Some promises have to be kept, no matter the cost. And Jonas Reed had made a promise to a frightened little girl. He meant to keep it. The trail down the mountain was steep and treacherous in the darkness, but Jonas knew it well enough. He'd walked it dozens of times over the years, always during daylight, always taking his time. Tonight he moved faster, though still careful. A broken ankle wouldn't help Emma Hartford any. The moon was nearly full, giving enough light to see by once his eyes adjusted. He could hear the creek running somewhere to his left and the wind moving through the pines overhead. Night sounds, an owl calling, something small rustling through the underbrush. Ordinary sounds of a world going about its business, indifferent to human suffering. As he walked, memories came to him unbidden. The last time he'd strapped on a gun with purpose. The last time he'd prepared to face down violent men. It had been more than 7 years ago, but his body remembered. His hand kept drifting to the pistol at his hip, checking it was there, checking the thong was loose so he could draw if needed. Old habits coming back like they'd never left. He thought about Sarah's face, the desperate hope in her eyes when she asked him to save her mother. It was the same expression his own daughter Rachel had worn sometimes when she'd asked him to fix something. A broken doll, a scraped knee, a bad dream. That absolute faith that Papa could make everything right, except he hadn't made everything right. He'd been 3 days away chasing horse thieves while his daughter burned with fever, while his wife Clara tried desperately to keep their little girl alive, probably knowing it was hopeless, but fighting anyway, because that's what mothers did. Jonas stumbled slightly on a root, caught himself. He needed to focus on the present, not the past. The past was dead and buried. Emma Hartford was alive and needed help now, tonight. After about an hour of steady walking, he stopped to rest at a spot where the trail widened out. There was a fallen log here that made a decent seat, and he sat down to catch his breath and think through what came next. 6 men. The Dalton brothers plus 3 hired guns. All of them armed, all of them experienced with violence. Meanwhile, he was one man who hadn't fired a shot in anger in 7 years, hadn't been in a real fight in all that time. His hands were strong from splitting wood and setting traps, but that was different from the kind of violence he'd be facing. He needed to be smart about this. Rushing in would just get him killed and leave Emma with no help at all. Jonas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the old marshal's badge, turning it over in his hands. The metal was tarnished, the letters barely readable in the moonlight, but he could trace them with his finger. His name, his authority, or what used to be his authority anyway. He remembered the day the territorial governor had pinned it on him. Jonas had been 30 years old, full of conviction that law and order mattered, that good men standing together could hold back the darkness. He'd believed in the badge, in what it represented. Clara had been so proud. She'd polished it for him every week, making sure it gleamed. Said it ought to shine bright so people knew help was coming when they saw him. She'd been beautiful and idealistic, believing in him completely. The memories threatened to pull him under, so he pushed them aside roughly. He couldn't afford to drown in the past, not now. But the badge had meant something once. It had meant he stood for something, that he was the man who stepped forward when others stepped back. Maybe it could mean that again, just for one night. He thought about his final days as a lawman after Rachel and Clara died. He'd kept working for a few weeks, going through the motions, but his heart wasn't in it. Couldn't see the point anymore. What good was protecting strangers when he couldn't protect his own family? There'd been an incident with 3 drifters who'd robbed a store and roughed up the owner. Jonas had tracked them down and brought them in. But during the confrontation, one of them had gone for his gun. Jonas had shot him without hesitation, killed him clean. It was a justified shooting, everyone agreed. Self-defense. But afterward, Jonas had looked at the dead man, barely 20 years old, somebody's son, and felt nothing. No regret, no satisfaction, nothing at all. Just emptiness. That's when he knew he was done. A lawman who felt nothing when he killed was dangerous, to himself and everyone around him. So he'd turned in the badge and walked away. Came to these mountains to find some way to feel human again. And now here he was, 7 years later, heading back toward the exact life he'd left behind. The irony wasn't lost on him. Jonas stood up from the log and continued down the trail. He had maybe 2 more hours of walking before he reached the valley. That gave him time to work out a plan. Going in with guns blazing was suicide. 6 against 1, even if he got lucky and took down 2 or 3 of them, the others would kill him. And even if by some miracle he survived, what then? He'd be a murderer, wanted by the law, unable to return to his mountain. No, he needed to be careful. Scout the situation first, see where Emma was being held, see if there was a way to extract her quietly. Only use violence if there was no other choice. But even as he thought it, he knew that was wishful thinking. Men like the Daltons didn't respond to reason or negotiation. They understood one thing, force, and they'd keep hurting people until someone forced them to stop. The trail leveled out as he descended into lower elevations. The air felt warmer here, and the trees were different. More aspen and cottonwood mixed in with the pine. He was getting close to the valley floor. Jonas stopped again, this time to check his weapons more carefully. He ejected the cartridges from his rifle one by one, checking each for corrosion, then reloaded them. The rifle held 15 rounds. His pistol held 6, and he had another dozen cartridges on his gun belt. 33 rounds total. Ought to be enough for 6 men, if it came to that. If he was as good as he used to be, that was the real question, wasn't it? Was he still the man who'd been one of the best lawmen in Wyoming territory? Or was he just an old hermit who'd lost his edge along with everything else? He thought about the rocking chair in his cabin, the one he'd carved so carefully. He'd taken his time with it, shaped each piece exactly right, sanded it smooth until there were no rough edges anywhere. It was good work, patient work. The work of a man who had time and cared about doing things right. That's who he was now, a craftsman, a man who lived quietly and bothered no one. Could he become the other man again, the one who dealt in violence and death? Did he even want to? But then he thought about Sarah's face, about the desperation in her voice when she begged him to save her mama. Thought about Emma Hartford being dragged into that saloon, beaten and terrified, while a whole town stood by and did nothing. Some things couldn't be carved or built or fixed with patience and time. Some things required a different kind of response. Jonas checked the knife in his boot, making sure it was secure but easy to draw. His father had given him that knife when he was 16, taught him how to use it properly. A knife's more personal than a gun, his father had said. Use it when you have to, but remember, you'll carry every cut you make with you the rest of your life. Good advice, as it turned out. Jonas still remembered every man he'd killed with that knife. 3 of them over his years as a marshal. He remembered their faces, the look in their eyes when they realized they were dying. Those memories didn't fade, didn't get easier with time. He was about to add more memories to that collection. He could feel it coming, inevitable as sunrise. This wasn't going to end peacefully. The trail opened up ahead, and Jonas could see the lights of Elkridge Valley in the distance, maybe 2 miles away. Small yellow squares of lamplight in the darkness, marking out the town. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Emma Hartford was suffering. Somewhere down there, 6 violent men were sleeping or drinking or doing whatever evil men did when they thought they were untouchable. Jonas stood at the edge of the tree line and studied the town layout. What he could see of it, Main Street running east to west, buildings on both sides. The saloon was the largest structure, 2 stories, near the center of town. He could see it was more brightly lit than the other buildings, probably where the gang was holed up. He'd need to get closer, scout it properly before making any moves. Wait for dawn, maybe, when he could see better. But that meant Emma would spend more hours in their hands, suffering who knew what. The smart thing was to wait. The right thing was to move now. Jonas had spent 7 years choosing the smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that kept him isolated from risk and pain and human connection. Look where that had gotten him. Alone on a mountain, talking to ghosts, building furniture no one would ever sit in except him. Tonight, maybe it was time to choose differently. He started down toward the town, moving more carefully now, using the shadows and terrain to stay concealed. As he got closer, he could hear sounds carrying on the night air, piano music from the saloon, rough laughter, a woman's voice raised in song. The town looked peaceful enough on the surface. Most windows were dark, decent folks already in bed. But Jonas knew that appearance was deceiving. This town was sick, infected by the presence of the Dalton gang, and everyone in it knew it. They were all just pretending everything was normal, hoping that if they kept their heads down, the infection would pass them by. He skirted the edge of town, staying in the shadows, until he found a good vantage point, a slight rise on the north side where he could see most of the main street. He settled down behind some brush and watched. The saloon was definitely the center of activity. Light spilled from its windows, and he could see silhouettes moving inside. As he watched, a man stumbled out the front door and vomited in the street, then went back inside. Another man, one of the hired guns, Jonas guessed, stood on the porch smoking a cigarette, his rifle leaning against the wall beside him, one guard outside. That meant at least some of them were inside, probably drinking. Were all 6 there, or had some of them found other accommodations? Jonas settled in to watch and wait. He needed more information before he could act. Needed to know where Emma was, how many men were guarding her, what his best approach would be. The night was cold, and his breath made small clouds in front of his face. He ignored the discomfort. He'd spent plenty of nights on stakeouts during his martial days, learned how to stay still and patient no matter what. Time passed slowly. The guard on the porch finished his cigarette and was replaced by another man. This one was heavier, walked with a slight limp. Jonas filed that information away. A man with a limp couldn't move as fast, might be easier to take down if it came to close combat. The piano music stopped, then started again. More laughter. The sounds of men who thought they owned the world, and everyone in it. Jonas's hand drifted to the badge in his pocket, his fingers tracing its familiar shape. He thought about pinning it on, walking down that street openly, confronting them as a lawman. But he wasn't a lawman anymore. That authority had ended years ago. He was just a man now, a man with a promise to keep to a frightened little girl. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that had to be enough. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Jonas had learned what he needed to know. 6 men total, all staying in the saloon. Emma was being held somewhere inside, probably in one of the upstairs rooms. The guards rotated every few hours, but they were lazy about it, often leaving the front unguarded for minutes at a time. He had a plan now. Not a good plan maybe, but a plan. Jonas stood up slowly, working the stiffness out of his legs. His knees popped. He wasn't a young man anymore. And a night spent crouched in the cold reminded him of that fact. But age brought some advantages, too. Patience, wisdom, the knowledge that fear was something you felt but didn't have to obey. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was going to be a beautiful day. Jonas checked his weapons one more time, then started down toward the town, toward the confrontation that waited. Toward whatever ending this story was going to have. He didn't pray. He'd stopped praying when Clara and Rachel died. But he did make a quiet promise to himself. Whatever happened today, Sarah Hartford would not grow up an orphan if he could prevent it. That little girl had already lost her father. She wasn't going to lose her mother too. Not while Jonas Reed still drew breath. Jonas waited until full daylight before entering the town proper. Moving in darkness would make him look suspicious, like he had something to hide. Better to walk in openly, just another mountain man come down to trade or resupply. The town was starting to wake up as he walked down the main street. A shopkeeper was sweeping his front porch. A woman hurried past with the basket eyes down, not looking at anyone. The blacksmith's forge was already glowing, and Jonas could hear the ring of hammer on metal. But there was something wrong with the town's rhythm, something off. People moved too quickly, kept their eyes averted. No one called out greetings to neighbors. No children played in the street. It was a town holding its breath, waiting for something bad to pass. Jonas headed for the general store, the same one where Sarah said her mother had been assaulted. As he approached, he noticed something on the ground near the front steps, a small metal object catching the morning light. He bent down and picked it up. It was a sewing thimble, dented and stained with what looked like dried blood. Jonas turned it over in his hand, feeling the weight of it. Emma Hartford's thimble, most likely lost during her attack. He slipped it into his pocket. Another small piece of evidence of what had happened here. The store was dim inside after the brightness of morning. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with dry goods, tools, fabric, and all the other necessities of frontier life. An old man stood behind the counter, thin and stooped, with wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up when Jonas entered and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or just wariness. "Help you?" the man asked, his voice neutral. "Coffee, if you've got it," Jonas said. "And I could use some information." The shopkeeper's face closed down immediately. "Got coffee. Information's harder to come by these days." Jonas set a silver dollar on the counter. "The coffee first, then." As the man measured out beans and poured them into a paper sack, Jonas looked around the store. There was a dark stain on the wooden floor near the door. More blood, he suspected. The place felt empty despite being full of goods, as if something vital had been sucked out of it. Quiet town, Jonas observed. Used to be. The shopkeeper handed him the coffee, took the dollar, made change. His hands shook slightly. Heard there's been some trouble. The old man's eyes darted toward the window, checking the street. Mister, I don't know who you are or what you've heard, but the best advice I can give you is to buy what you need and move on. This isn't a good place to be asking questions. What about a woman named Emma Hartford? She all right? The shopkeeper's face went pale. You know Emma? Her daughter came to me, asked me to help. Then you're a fool for coming here. But there was something else in the old man's voice now. Maybe hope, maybe just desperation. Those men have her upstairs in the saloon. Doc Henshaw saw her yesterday, said she was beat up pretty bad. Broken ribs, maybe. Face all swelled up. Jonas felt that cold fury settle deeper into his bones. The sheriff doing anything about it? The shopkeeper actually laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. Tom Ridley, he's the biggest coward in the territory. Told everyone to cooperate, give the Daltons whatever they want. Said they'd move on eventually if we didn't cause trouble. Will they? Does it matter? Even if they leave, what kind of people are we if we just let them do whatever they want? Let them beat a defenseless woman and... He stopped himself, looked away. Jonas waited. Sometimes silence got more answers than questions. The shopkeeper wiped his spectacles, a nervous gesture. My name's Howard Price. My wife Catherine runs the dress shop 2 doors down. We've lived in this town 30 years. Built it up from nothing, made it a good place to raise families. Now look at it. Everyone's scared. No one trusts each other anymore. It's like watching something you love die slowly. How many men are we talking about? 6. The 3 Dalton brothers and 3 others. They've been here 4 days now, and it feels like 4 years. Price leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Yesterday I heard Cyrus, the big one, the leader, telling his brother that they're planning to move north in a day or 2. Said he's taking Emma with him, gonna sell her to a brothel up in Denver or keep her for himself. Either way, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Jonas nodded slowly, processing this information. So he had a deadline. Maybe a day, maybe less. After that, even if he managed to rescue Emma, they'd have to run, be fugitives. There a doctor in town? He asked. Doc Henshaw. Office is across from the saloon, little white building. He's a good man, helped patch Emma up best he could before they locked her away again. I'll need to talk to him. Anything else I should know? Price studied him for a long moment. I know who you are. Or I know what folks say about you anyway. The mountain man lives alone up in the high country. They say you used to be a lawman once. That was a long time ago. Maybe so. But lawmen don't stop being lawmen, not really. Not the good ones. Price's voice was urgent now. Those men up there, they're not just outlaws. They're animals. Cyrus Dalton killed a man in Kansas just for looking at him wrong. Cole's wanted for murder in 3 territories. Vernon's the worst. He's smart, military-trained. Served in the cavalry before they drummed him out for executing prisoners. Jonas felt something cold settle in his stomach at that last piece of information. Military-trained. That changed things. 6 of them, 1 of you, Price continued. Those are bad odds. I've faced worse. It wasn't entirely true, but Jonas said it anyway. There's more. Price glanced at the door again. They've got people in this town feeding them information. Not everyone, but some. Folk who think cooperating will keep them safe, or maybe just folk who are looking out for themselves. Point is, anything you do, assume they'll hear about it. That complicated matters considerably. Jonas couldn't trust anyone in this town except maybe this shopkeeper, and even that was a gamble. Why are you telling me this? Jonas asked. Price's jaw tightened. Because somebody needs to stand up. Because I'm too old and too scared to do it myself, and that shame is eating me alive. Because Emma Hartford is a good woman who never hurt anybody, and what's happening to her is wrong. Because if we all just keep our heads down and let evil walk right through our town, what does that make us? Jonas understood. He'd seen it before, good people paralyzed by fear, hating themselves for their paralysis, but unable to break free of it. It was the thing that made evil men powerful, not their strength, but everyone else's weakness. I'll need supplies, Jonas said. Rope, lamp oil, matches, and I need it quietly, Price nodded. I can do that. Catherine will help too. She's tougher than I am, truth be told. While Price gathered the supplies, Jonas walked to the store's front window and looked out at the street. The saloon dominated the view, a two-story structure with a wide porch and batwing doors. Even from here he could see it was well built, solid, no easy way to break in. And once inside, every floorboard would creak, every door would squeak. Not a place you could move through quietly. A man appeared on the saloon's porch, tall, thin, wearing a gun belt slung low on his hips. One of the hired guns, Jonas guessed. The man stretched, yawned, lit a cigarette. He looked relaxed, unconcerned. Why wouldn't he be? He and his friends owned this town completely. Jonas watched the man's movements, noting the way he wore his gun, how his hand rested naturally near it. A professional, or at least someone with experience. That made 6 professional killers against one aging mountain man who hadn't been in a real fight in 7 years. Price came back with the supplies wrapped in brown paper. "No charge," he said when Jonas reached for money. "Consider it my contribution to whatever you're planning. Your wife's dress shop. What's her name again?" "Catherine Price. Why?" "I might need her help later. She trustworthy?" "More than I am," Price said quietly. "More than most people in this town." Jonas nodded, took the supplies. "One more thing. If this goes bad, if I don't make it, Sarah Hartford, Emma's daughter, she's up in my cabin in the mountains. Someone needs to look after her. It won't come to that. If it does," Price met his eyes. "I'll see to it personally." "You have my word." Jonas left the store and walked down the street toward the doctor's office. The sun was fully up now, and the town was going about its business, or trying to anyway. But everywhere he looked, he saw the signs of fear. People hurrying, not meeting his eyes, hunching their shoulders like they were expecting a blow. This was what evil did. Not just the direct harm it caused, but the way it poisoned everything around it, made people smaller and meaner and more afraid. Doc Henshaw's office was a small white building with a red cross painted on the door. Jonas knocked and waited. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a man in his 60s, balding, with kind eyes behind steel-rimmed glasses. "Dr. Henshaw?" "That's right." "You sick?" "No, I need to talk to you about Emma Hartford." The doctor's expression changed immediately, wariness mixed with something that might have been hope. "You better come inside." The office smelled of carbolic acid and camphor. Henshaw led Jonas into his examination room and closed the door. "Who are you?" "Jonas Reed. Emma's daughter came to me for help. Little Sarah. She made it that far?" "Thank God." Henshaw sat down heavily in his chair. "That child ran off yesterday afternoon. When Emma heard, she was terrified the Daltons would go after her. She made it to my cabin. She's safe. But her mother isn't, and I need to know exactly what condition she's in." Henshaw's face darkened. "Not good. Cyrus Dalton beat her severely. I was able to examine her briefly before they took her back upstairs. She has at least 2 broken ribs, extensive bruising, a split lip, possible concussion. She needs rest and proper medical care, neither of which she's getting. Can she walk?" "With help, maybe. But it would be painful." "Mr. Reed, what exactly are you planning?" Jonas didn't answer directly. "Where are they keeping her?" "Second floor, back room on the right. There's always at least one man guarding the hallway." Henshaw leaned forward. "Listen to me. I've seen men like you before, good men who think they can solve problems with courage and a gun. But there are 6 of them and 1 of you. This isn't some dime novel where the hero wins because he's in the right. This is real life, and in real life the bad men usually win." "Not always," Jonas said quietly. "You'll die. And then Emma will still be their prisoner, and that little girl will be an orphan. Then I better make sure I don't die." Jonas stood. "I need you to have medical supplies ready. Bandages, whatever you use for broken ribs, laudanum for pain. By tonight you're going to have patients." Henshaw studied him for a long moment. "You're serious about this? I made a promise to a little girl." "I intend to keep it," the doctor sighed, removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "All right, I'll prepare what I can. But Mr. Reed, even if you somehow manage to get Emma out of there, the Daltons won't just let it go. They'll come after you. After everyone who helped, let them come. After leaving the doctor's office, Jonas found a spot at the edge of town where he could watch the saloon without being obvious about it. He settled in behind a water trough and studied the building carefully, noting every detail. The saloon had two entrances, the main batwing doors in front and a back door that probably led to a storage room or kitchen. There were windows on both floors, but most of them were closed. The second-floor window on the back right was different, though. Someone had hung a blanket over it, blocking the view inside. That was probably Emma's room, as he watched men came and went from the saloon. He saw Cyrus Dalton emerge around mid-morning, a huge man, over 6 feet tall and heavy, with muscle gone to fat. He had a scar running down the left side of his face and eyes that held nothing but cruelty. This was a man who enjoyed hurting people. Jonas could see it plain as day. Behind Cyrus came 2 other men, who had to be his brothers. Cole was thinner, nervous energy in every movement, constantly touching his guns like he was afraid they might disappear. Vernon was different, quiet, controlled, with a military bearing that was unmistakable. He scanned the street with professional efficiency, noting everything and everyone. Vernon was the dangerous one. Jonas knew it instinctively. Cyrus was brutal and Cole was quick, but Vernon was the one with real training and discipline. He was the one Jonas would have to worry about most. The 3 hired guns appeared later. One was Mexican, middle-aged with a weathered face and steady hands. Another was young, maybe 25, with the cocky swagger of someone who thought being fast made him invincible. The third was older, heavy-set, with cold eyes that had seen too much killing. 6 men, all of them armed and dangerous, all of them comfortable with violence. Jonas had faced long odds before, but nothing quite like this. During his martial days, he'd usually had deputies backing him up, or at least the weight of law on his side. Here he had nothing but his weapons and his wits. The morning passed slowly. Jonas stayed in position, watching, learning their patterns. The guards rotated every few hours. They were lazy about it, complacent. That was good. Complacency bred mistakes. Around noon, a woman brought food to the saloon, probably the owner's wife or a hired girl. She went in through the back door and came out 10 minutes later, her face tight with distress. Jonas caught her eye as she passed, and she quickly looked away, but not before he saw the shame and fear there. Everyone in this town was living with shame. Shame at their own cowardice, shame at what they were allowing to happen. It was a heavy burden, Jonas knew. He'd carried his own share of it. He thought about Emma Hartford, locked in that room, injured and afraid. Thought about Sarah waiting in his cabin, hoping he'd keep his promise. Thought about Clara and Rachel, about all the people he'd failed to protect when it mattered most. This time would be different. This time he wouldn't be 3 days away, chasing the wrong men. This time he'd be right here, doing what needed to be done. The sun was past its peak when Jonas finally moved from his position. He'd learned what he needed to know. Now he had to decide how to use that knowledge. He walked back through town, noting which buildings were occupied, which alleys offered cover, which rooftops might provide a good vantage point. He was planning a battlefield, the way he'd been trained to do during his martial days. Every engagement started with terrain, knowing where to stand, where to move, where to retreat if necessary. He stopped at the church on the edge of town, a simple white building with a cross on top. The door was unlocked, and he stepped inside. It was cool and dim, smelling of old wood and candle wax. Empty pews faced a simple altar. Jonas hadn't been in a church since his family's funeral, hadn't seen the point. God had taken everything from him, so what was there to talk about? But he found himself walking down the aisle and sitting in a front pew anyway. Not to pray exactly, but just to sit in the quiet and think. "I don't expect any help," he said aloud to the empty church. "I'm not asking for miracles. I'm just telling you, I'm going to do this thing, and whatever happens, at least I tried. At least I didn't turn away when someone needed me." The church was silent. No voice from heaven, no divine guidance. Just Jonas and his thoughts and his memories. He pulled out Clara's locket, opened it, looked at the faces of his wife and daughter. They seemed so young in the photograph, so full of life and hope. He'd failed them. He'd been the marshal, the protector, and he'd failed the 2 people who needed him most. "I can't fix what happened to you," he said softly. "I can't bring you back or change anything. But maybe I can stop it from happening to someone else. Maybe that's worth something." He closed the locket and put it away. Then he pulled out the tarnished badge and held it in his palm, feeling its weight. Marshal Jonas Reed, Wyoming Territory. That man was dead and buried, but maybe some part of him could live again, just for one night. Just long enough to do what needed doing. Jonas pinned the badge to his shirt, over his heart. It felt strange there after so many years, strange but somehow right, like putting on an old coat that still fit, despite the passage of time. He left the church and headed back toward the saloon. Evening was coming on, and with it would come darkness. Darkness was when he'd make his move, but first he needed to talk to Catherine Price. If this was going to work, he'd need help. And from what her husband had said, she might be the only person in this town brave enough to give it. Catherine Price's dress shop was a neat little building with a hand-painted sign and curtains in the windows. Jonas pushed open the door, and a small bell chimed above his head. The shop smelled of fabric and lavender, and dress forms stood in the corners wearing half-finished garments. An older woman looked up from behind a counter where she was pinning a hem. She was in her 60s, grey-haired, with sharp eyes and capable hands. When she saw Jonas, her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her gaze, recognition of the badge on his chest, maybe. Or just an understanding that something was about to happen. "Mrs. Price." "I am, and you're the mountain man Howard told me about." She set down her pins and studied him openly. "He said you used to be a lawman." "A long time ago. Doesn't look that long ago to me." "You're wearing the badge." Jonas touched the metal on his chest, almost surprised to find it there. "Your husband said you might be willing to help." "Help how?" "I need to get Emma Hartford out of that saloon. I need someone who can get information without raising suspicion." Catherine came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a small woman, but there was steel in her bearing. "What makes you think I can do that?" "Your husband said you're tougher than him. And I figure a woman can go places and hear things that a man can't." She smiled slightly at that, a sad smile that held years of experience. "My husband talks too much sometimes. But he's not wrong." She walked to the window and looked out at the street. "Emma Hartford is a good woman. When my husband died 5 years ago, heart attack went quick. She brought food to me every day for 2 weeks. Wouldn't let me pay her, wouldn't accept thanks. Just said that's what neighbors do for each other. I didn't know Howard was—" "He's not. That was my first husband, Robert." She turned back to Jonas. "Howard and I married 3 years ago. He's a good man, but Robert was, well, he was different. Robert would have walked into that saloon and gotten himself killed trying to save Emma. Howard knows his limitations, and that's honest in its own way." Jonas understood what she wasn't saying, that she loved them both, but in different ways. And maybe she missed the kind of man who'd have fought even knowing he'd lose. "I need to know the layout inside," he said. "Where Emma's being held, where the men sleep when they change guards. Anything that might help." Catherine nodded slowly. "I deliver laundry to the saloon twice a week. Did it before the Daltons came, still do it now. They haven't bothered me. I'm an old woman, not worth their attention. I can go over there this afternoon, see what I can learn. It might be dangerous. Mr. Reed, I'm 62 years old. I've buried one husband and watched this town die by degrees over the past 4 days. At this point, dangerous sounds better than safe." She met his eyes steadily. "Besides, if Emma dies or gets taken away, I'll have to live with knowing I could have helped, but chose not to. That's a worse fate than whatever the Daltons might do to me." Jonas recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same one he'd seen in the mirror that morning, the look of someone who'd decided that some things were worth the risk. "All right, but be careful. Don't ask direct questions, just observe. If anything feels wrong, leave immediately." "I've been careful my whole life," Catherine said. "Maybe it's time for something different." She gathered up a basket of clean laundry, sheets and towels, presumably from the saloon, and headed out. Jonas watched her go, a small grey-haired woman walking straight back toward a building full of killers, carrying nothing but clean linens and more courage than most men had in their whole bodies. While she was gone, Jonas used the time to prepare. He went back to where he'd stashed his supplies and began working out the details of his plan. The lamp oil would be key. Fire was a great equalizer, created chaos and confusion. The rope could be used for climbing or for restraining prisoners. The matches were obvious, but the real weapon would be surprise and speed. Hit them when they weren't expecting it. Hit them hard, and don't give them time to organize. Get Emma out and disappear before they could mount an effective response. It was a simple plan, which meant there were 100 ways it could go wrong. But simple was often better than complicated when you were outnumbered and outgunned. Jonas found himself thinking about Vernon Dalton again. Military trained, Howard Price had said. Served in the cavalry. That meant he'd know tactics, would recognize patterns, might even anticipate what Jonas was planning. There was something familiar about that name too, Vernon Dalton. Jonas turned it over in his mind, trying to remember where he'd heard it before. It nagged at him like a half-remembered dream. The cavalry. Wyoming territory. Court-martial for executing prisoners, and then it hit him. A memory rising up from 15 years in the past. Captain Jonas Reed testifying at a military tribunal. A young lieutenant accused of executing Confederate prisoners in cold blood during the Indian Wars. Jonas had been called as a character witness for the prosecution. He'd been the one who'd found the bodies and reported the crime. The lieutenant's name had been Vernon Dalton Jonas. Sat down heavily on a crate, the implications sinking in. Vernon knew who he was. They'd served together, and Jonas had been instrumental in getting Vernon drummed out of the military. That court-martial had ended Vernon's career and started him down the path to outlawry. This changed everything. This wasn't just a rescue operation anymore. This was personal. Vernon would see Jonas coming, would recognize him, might even be expecting him. And if Vernon had held onto that grudge for 15 years, he'd have had a long time to think about revenge. Jonas stood up, his mind working through the new calculations. If Vernon knew who he was, then Vernon would have told the others. Or maybe not. Maybe Vernon wanted Jonas for himself. Either way, Jonas couldn't count on surprise anymore. He'd be walking into a situation where at least one man knew exactly who he was and wanted him dead for reasons that had nothing to do with Emma Hartford. Catherine returned about an hour later, slipping into the alley where Jonas waited. Her face was pale but composed. "Well?" he asked. "Emma's in the back room, second floor, just like Doc Henshaw said. There's one man guarding the hallway at all times, sitting in a chair outside her door. They rotate every few hours." She paused. "I heard her crying through the door. They're not treating her well." Jonas felt his jaw tighten. "What else?" "The main floor is where they spend most of their time, gambling, drinking. There's a back staircase that leads up to the second floor, servants' stairs originally. It's in the kitchen area, mostly hidden. That might be your best way up. How many men did you see?" "4, the big one, Cyrus, and 3 others. I think the other 2 were upstairs sleeping. They're drinking pretty heavy, Mr. Reed. By tonight they'll be drunk or nearly so. That's when I'll make my move. After dark, when they're at their worst." Catherine reached into her basket and pulled out a key. "This is the back door key. The saloon owner's wife gave it to me. She's too frightened to help openly, but she wants Emma out of there. She said the kitchen door sticks, so you have to lift it while you turn the key." Jonas took the key, feeling the weight of it. "Thank you. This makes a big difference. There's something else." Catherine's voice dropped lower. I overheard them talking. Vernon, the military-looking one, he was telling Cyrus that they should leave tomorrow morning, first light. Said there was a stranger in town, and it made him nervous. I think he was talking about you, so Vernon had spotted him after all. That meant Jonas's window was even narrower than he'd thought. He had to move tonight, and he had to assume Vernon would be ready for him. Did you hear anything else? Just that Vernon wanted to kill Emma before they left. Said she was too much trouble to transport. But Cyrus wants to keep her. Said she'd fetch good money up north, or he might keep her for himself. Catherine's voice hardened. They were talking about her like she was property. Like she wasn't even human. Jonas had heard enough. He'd spent the whole day gathering information, learning patterns, making plans. But at the end of the day, it all came down to the same thing. 6 evil men had a good woman locked in a room, and they weren't going to give her up without a fight. Fine, he'd give them a fight, Mrs. Price. When the trouble starts, and it will start, probably around midnight, I need you and your husband to stay inside, doors locked. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Can you do that? We can! But Mr. Reed, what about after? Even if you get Emma out, the Daltons won't just ride away. They'll tear this town apart looking for you. I know, but that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight's problem is getting Emma Hartford back to her daughter alive. Catherine studied his face for a long moment. You're a good man, Jonas Reed. This town doesn't deserve you. This town's got nothing to do with it. I made a promise to a little girl. He touched the badge on his chest. And a long time ago, I made a promise to wear this with honor. I broke a lot of promises in my life, Mrs. Price. I'm not breaking these ones. She nodded, seeming to understand. God go with you then. If he's inclined to help, I won't turn him away. But I'm not counting on it. Jonas spent the rest of the afternoon in final preparations. He checked his weapons again, loaded and reloaded them until the motions were automatic. He worked out his route into the saloon, through the kitchen, up the back stairs. He mentally rehearsed what he'd do when he encountered the guard, how he'd get Emma out, where he'd take her. But he also prepared for failure. He wrote a short note and gave it to Catherine Price, instructions for how to find his cabin, how to care for Sarah if he didn't make it back. Catherine took the note without comment, folded it carefully, and put it in her pocket. As evening fell and the saloon lights came on, Jonas found a quiet spot behind the church and sat with his thoughts. The last few hours before action were always the hardest. Too much time to think about everything that could go wrong, about all the ways a plan could fall apart. He thought about Sarah, probably sitting in his rocking chair right now, watching the door, waiting for him to come back with her mama. He thought about Emma, locked in that room, injured and terrified. He thought about Clara and Rachel, about promises kept and promises broken, and he thought about Vernon Dalton, waiting somewhere in that saloon, probably knowing Jonas was coming, probably planning his own response. 2 old soldiers, reunited under the worst possible circumstances, with a woman's life hanging in the balance. The thing about Vernon was that he'd been good once. Jonas remembered that clearly. Vernon had been a promising young officer, brave and capable, someone Jonas had thought might make a fine leader someday. But something had broken in him during the war, the casual brutality of it, the way violence became routine. Vernon had crossed a line, executing prisoners, because it was easier than dealing with them properly. Jonas had reported it because it was the right thing to do, because laws and honor mattered even in wartime. But he'd never forgotten the look in Vernon's eyes when the verdict came down. Not just anger, but betrayal. Like Jonas had somehow wronged him by expecting him to follow the rules. Now 15 years later, they were about to meet again. And one of them probably wasn't going to walk away. Full darkness came to Elkridge Valley like a curtain falling. The stars were bright overhead, and a cold wind blew down from the mountains, carrying the smell of pine and coming snow. Jonas waited in the shadows behind the church, watching the town settle into uneasy sleep. Most windows were dark now. The decent folk had gone to bed, or at least pretended to, hoping that if they ignored the evil in their midst, it might ignore them back. Only the saloon blazed with light and noise, piano music, rough laughter, the sounds of men who thought they owned the world. Jonas pulled out Clara's locket one more time, opened it, looked at the faces of his wife and daughter in the dim starlight. He'd carried this locket for over 7 years, a reminder of what he'd lost, of why he'd chosen solitude over the world of men. I know I promised no more violence, he said softly to their images. I know I swore I was done with all of that. But Clara, if you could see that little girl's face, hear her voice when she begged me to help her mama, I think you'd understand. I think you'd tell me this is the right thing to do. Rachel looked up at him from the photograph with her innocent eyes. 7 years old when she died, the same age as Sarah Hartford. The same age. I couldn't save you, baby girl, Jonas whispered. I was too far away chasing the wrong men, being a hero for the wrong people. But maybe I can save Sarah's mama. Maybe that counts for something. He closed the locket and put it away. Then he stood up, rolled his shoulders, and checked his weapons one final time. The Winchester felt solid in his hands, familiar despite the years. The Colt sat comfortable on his hip. The knife was secure in his boot. Everything was ready. Now came the hard part, the waiting until the right moment. Around 10 o'clock, he saw Vernon Dalton emerge from the saloon and walk down the street, moving with purpose. Jonas pressed himself deeper into the shadows and watched. Vernon stopped at the general store, tried the door, found it locked. He stood there for a moment, looking up and down the street, as if he could sense Jonas's presence. Then he did something that made Jonas's blood run cold. Vernon looked directly at the church, directly at the spot where Jonas was hidden, and smiled. Not a friendly smile, a predator's smile, he knew. Somehow, he knew Jonas was there. Vernon called out, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. I know you're out there, Captain Reed, or should I call you Marshal? I saw you this morning, recognized you right away. 15 years, but some faces you don't forget. Jonas stayed silent and still. You're thinking about coming for the woman, aren't you? Vernon continued. Thinking you're going to sneak in, play the hero, save the day like you always did. But I know you, Captain. I know how you think, how you plan, how you fight. Served under you for 2 years before you destroyed my career. I learned everything from you. Still, Jonas didn't move, didn't respond. Vernon's smile widened. She's a pretty woman, Emma Hartford. Cyrus has taken quite a liking to her. By morning, there probably won't be much left worth saving. But you know that already, don't you? That's why you're going to try something tonight. And I'll be waiting. He turned and walked back to the saloon, whistling tunelessly, leaving Jonas alone in the darkness with rage burning in his chest. Vernon was goading him, trying to make him act rashly, make mistakes. It was a smart play. Appeal to Jonas's sense of honor and urgency, make him abandon careful planning for emotional response. Vernon had learned well, but Jonas had learned a few things too in the years since they'd served together. He'd learned patience. He'd learned that sometimes the right move was the one your enemy didn't expect. And he'd learned that the man who kept his head while others lost theirs usually came out ahead. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to let the anger settle into something colder and more useful. Vernon wanted him angry. Fine, he was angry. But he'd use that anger instead of letting it use him. Jonas moved from his position behind the church and circled around to the back of the buildings on the north side of the street. He took his time, staying low and quiet, using every shadow and every bit of cover. The supplies Catherine had given him were wrapped and ready: lamp oil, rope, matches, tools for the work ahead. The saloon's back door was exactly where Catherine had described it, set into the wall of the kitchen area. Jonas crouched beside it and listened. He could hear voices from inside, but they were distant, probably in the main room. The kitchen sounded quiet. He inserted the key Catherine had given him, remembered her instructions about lifting while turning. The lock clicked softly, and the door swung inward with only the faintest creak. Jonas slipped inside, closing the door behind him. The kitchen was dark and smelled of grease and stale beer. He could see the outline of a stove, a counter, shelves stocked with supplies. And there, against the far wall, the servants' staircase Catherine had mentioned. He moved across the kitchen, each step careful and deliberate. The floorboards were old and likely to creak, but he'd spent years moving quietly through forests, stalking game. He knew how to distribute his weight, how to find the solid spots. The staircase was narrow and steep. Jonas started up, the Winchester held ready. If someone came down these stairs, there'd be no room for finesse. It would be close quarters, brutal and fast. But the stairs were empty. He reached the second-floor landing and paused, listening. The sounds from below were clearer now, men's voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. They were still drinking, still confident in their control of the situation. The hallway stretched before him, lit by a single lamp turned low. And there, about halfway down, exactly as Catherine had described, sat a man in a chair outside a closed door. The guard, it was the young one, the cocky one who'd swaggered around earlier. He had a bottle beside him and was taking occasional swigs, clearly bored with his assignment. His rifle leaned against the wall, just out of easy reach. Sloppy. Jonas considered his options. He could shoot the guard from here, but the sound would alert everyone in the building. He could try to rush him, but that meant crossing 15 feet of open hallway where the guard would see him coming. Or he could wait for the guard to drink himself to sleep, but time was something Jonas didn't have much of. He needed a distraction, something that would get the guard to move from his position. Jonas looked around the landing and spotted what he needed, a bucket probably used for washing floors. He picked up a small piece of broken wood from the corner, held it for a moment, then tossed it down the back stairs. It clattered loudly in the quiet. The guard's head came up immediately, and he grabbed his rifle. "Who's there?" Jonas pressed himself flat against the wall near the top of the main staircase. The guard stood up, peered down the hallway toward the servants' stairs. "That you, Ramirez? If you're trying to scare me..." He started walking down the hall toward the sound, rifle held ready, but not quite aimed. He was nervous now, his earlier confidence shaken. When he reached the servants' staircase and started down, Jonas moved. 3 long strides brought him to the guard's chair. He scooped up the bottle, half full and heavy, and continued to the staircase. The guard was almost out of sight, descending into the darkness of the kitchen. Jonas came up behind him silently, raised the bottle, and brought it down hard against the back of the guard's skull. The man dropped like a cut string, his rifle clattering on the stairs. Jonas caught him before he could fall all the way down and make more noise. The guard was out cold, bleeding from a cut on his scalp but alive. Jonas dragged him back up to the landing, bound his hands and feet with rope, and stuffed a gag in his mouth. Then he took the guard's position by Emma's door, listening for any sign that the commotion had been noticed. Nothing. The sounds from below continued unchanged. They hadn't heard a thing. Jonas tried Emma's door, locked. He pulled out his knife and worked it into the gap between door and frame, feeling for the latch. It was a simple lock, the kind meant more for privacy than security. After a moment of careful pressure, he felt it give. The door swung open, and Jonas stepped inside. Emma Hartford lay on a narrow bed against the far wall. She was conscious, her eyes going wide when she saw him. Even in the dim light, he could see the damage Cyrus Dalton had done. Her face was swollen and bruised, one eye nearly shut, her lips split and crusted with dried blood. "Don't scream," Jonas said softly, holding up one hand. "I'm here to help. Your daughter Sarah sent me." At Sarah's name, Emma's expression changed from fear to desperate hope. She tried to sit up and gasped at the pain. "Sarah, is she safe?" "She's at my cabin in the mountains. She's fine, waiting for you." Jonas moved to the bed, helping her sit up carefully. "We don't have much time. Can you walk?" "I think so." Emma's voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming or crying. "My ribs," Doc Henshaw told me. "I'll help you, but we need to move now, before they realize their guard is gone." Emma stood shakily, and Jonas put his arm around her to support her weight. She was light, too light, clearly hadn't been eating properly. She wore only a thin dress, torn and dirty. "Here," Jonas shrugged out of his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "Can you manage the stairs?" "I'll manage." There was steel in her voice despite the pain. "Get me out of here and I'll crawl if I have to." They made it to the door, and Jonas checked the hallway. Still clear. The unconscious guard lay where he'd left him, breathing steadily. Jonas considered finishing the job, one less enemy to worry about, but found he couldn't. The kid was out of the fight, tied and helpless. Killing him would be murder, not defense. Clara's voice in his head. "Some lines, once you cross them, you can't cross back." He turned toward the servants' stairs, supporting Emma's weight. They'd made it maybe 3 steps, when Vernon Dalton's voice rang out from the main staircase behind them. "Going somewhere, Captain?" Jonas turned, putting Emma behind him, his hand dropping to his pistol. Vernon stood at the top of the main stairs, relaxed and smiling. his own gun already drawn and aimed casually in their direction. "I told you I'd be waiting," Vernon said. Jonas stood frozen, Emma Hartford trembling behind him. Vernon Dalton's gun pointed steadily at his chest. The hallway felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing in. From below, the piano music continued, oblivious to the standoff upstairs. "Easy now," Vernon said, his voice calm and controlled. "Your hand moves another inch toward that Colt, and I put a bullet through your heart. We both know I won't miss at this range." Jonas kept his hand still, hovering near his pistol but not touching it. Vernon was right. At 15 feet, with his gun already drawn, Vernon held all the advantages. "Let her go. She's got nothing to do with whatever's between you and me. Doesn't it, though?" Vernon took a step forward, and Jonas could see his face more clearly now in the lamplight. He'd aged since their cavalry days. Harder lines around his mouth, a scar across his left cheek, eyes that had seen too much darkness. "See, I've been thinking about this moment for 15 years. 15 years since you stood up in that courtroom and destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life when you executed those prisoners. They were enemy combatants. We were at war. They were unarmed and surrendering. That's murder, Vernon, and you know it." Vernon's smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. Old rage, old justifications. "I did what was necessary. Those men would have been back fighting us within the month. I saved American lives. You violated the code you swore to uphold. The code." Vernon laughed, a bitter sound. "The same code that let politicians send us to die in the desert for nothing. The same code that abandoned us when we came home." That code? Jonas understood then what he was dealing with. Vernon hadn't just turned to outlawry for money or excitement. He'd convinced himself that he was right, that the world had wronged him, that everything he'd done since was justified. It was a story Jonas had seen before. Good men who crossed a line and then spent the rest of their lives justifying it. "This isn't about the war anymore," Jonas said quietly. "This is about right now. About this woman who's done nothing wrong except refuse to be victimized." The climb up the mountain was agony for Emma, and Jonas knew it. Every step jarred her broken ribs. Every breath was shallow and painful. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. She just kept putting one foot in front of the other, driven by the thought of her daughter, waiting at the end of this nightmare trail. They'd been climbing for maybe an hour when Emma finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" "You don't even know me. Your daughter asked me to," Jonas said simply. "That's reason enough, but you could have said no. You could have stayed in your cabin, stayed safe." Jonas was quiet for a moment, helping her over a rough patch of trail. "I had a daughter once, same age as Sarah. She died while I was off being a hero for strangers. Maybe this is my way of making that right. You can't bring her back." "No, but I can keep someone else's daughter from losing her mother." They continued in silence after that, saving their breath for the climb. The trail was steep and treacherous in the darkness, but Jonas knew every rock and root. Behind them, the glow from the burning saloon lit the valley like a false dawn. Jonas's mind was working furiously, planning and calculating. Vernon would come after them, that was certain. The fire might delay him an hour, maybe 2, but then he'd be on their trail. And Vernon was military trained, knew how to track, knew how to plan an assault. He'd bring the others with him, or at least some of them. The odds would still be terrible. The smart thing would be to get Emma to the cabin, grab Sarah and keep running, head deeper into the mountains where the Daltons couldn't follow. But that meant weeks of hard travel with an injured woman and a 7-year-old child, with winter coming on fast. They'd likely freeze before they reached safety. No, there had to be another way. Had to be some way to end this here, on ground of Jonas's choosing, where his knowledge of the terrain could offset their numbers. An idea was forming. Dangerous and desperate, but maybe their only real chance. If he could draw Vernon and the others into a specific area, set up an ambush, use the mountain itself as a weapon. Jonas. Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I need to rest. Just for a minute." They were about halfway to the cabin, at a spot where the trail widened onto a flat shelf of rock. Jonas helped Emma sit down with her back against a boulder. Her breathing was labored, and even in the dim starlight he could see how pale she was. "How are your ribs?" "They hurt," she admitted. "But I can keep going. Just needed to catch my breath." Jonas looked back down the trail. No sign of pursuit yet, but it would come. He could feel it in his bones. Vernon gathering his men, organizing them, preparing to hunt. "Emma, listen to me," he said. "When we get to the cabin, I'm going to get you and Sarah to safety. But I need to come back here, need to make a stand. If I don't, they'll just keep following us. You can't fight 6 men alone, might not be 6 anymore. That fire was spreading fast when we left, and even if it is 6, I've got advantages here. I know this mountain. They don't." Emma studied his face. "You're planning to die, aren't you? Make some last stand so we can escape." "I'm planning to win. But if you don't, then Sarah and I are alone in the wilderness with winter coming. We'd die anyway, just slower." She reached out and gripped his arm with surprising strength. "So you better win, Jonas Reed. You better come back." He couldn't promise that, so he didn't try. Instead, he helped her to her feet, and they continued climbing. They reached the cabin an hour before dawn. Sarah was asleep in Jonas's rocking chair, wrapped in his blanket, her small face peaceful in the firelight that had burned down to embers. When the door opened, she woke instantly, her eyes going wide. "Mama!" She launched herself from the chair and ran to Emma, who dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, oh my baby, you were so brave," Emma sobbed, holding Sarah tight despite the pain it caused her ribs. "So brave." Jonas stood back, letting them have their moment. He walked to his window and looked out at the trail, at the valley below. Still no sign of pursuit, but dawn was coming. Vernon would move with first light, use the daylight to track them. That gave Jonas maybe 2 hours to prepare. He went to his supply cache and started pulling out everything he'd need. More rope, his backup rifle, ammunition, his father's old hunting knife, the kerosene lantern Catherine had given him, and one more thing, a small wooden box he kept hidden under the floorboards. Inside the box were 4 sticks of dynamite, left over from when he'd cleared some rocks for his water system. He'd never expected to use them for anything else, but they'd do what needed doing. "Jonas!" Emma had come to stand beside him, Sarah still clinging to her. "What are you planning?" "There's a narrow pass about a mile back down the trail," he said. "Only way up here unless you want to spend 2 days climbing around. If I can funnel them through there, make them think I'm defending the cabin, I can catch them in a kill zone. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's better than letting them come here, putting you and Sarah in danger." He looked down at Sarah, who was watching him with those same trusting eyes she'd had when she appeared at his door. "I made a promise to get your mama back. I kept that promise. Now I'm going to make sure you're both safe." "We're already safe," Sarah said. "You saved us." "Not yet, little one." "Not quite yet." Jonas spent the next hour in preparation. He showed Emma where his emergency supplies were kept: food, water, blankets, medical supplies. He wrote another note, this time with directions to the nearest settlement 3 days' ride north, and instructions to find Doc Henshaw or the Prices if she made it back to Elkridge Valley. "If I'm not back by tomorrow night," he told Emma, "you take Sarah and head north. Don't wait for me. Don't come looking for me. Just go." "Jonas, promise me, Emma, I didn't save you just so you could throw your life away waiting for me." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "I promise." As the first grey light of dawn touched the sky, Jonas gathered his weapons and supplies. Sarah came to him and threw her arms around his waist. "Come back," she whispered. "Please come back." He knelt down so he was eye level with her. "I'm going to try my hardest. You know why? Because you're the bravest little girl I've ever met, and brave girls deserve to have their stories end happy. So I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that happens." She nodded. Sniffling and hugged him again, Jonas stood, checked his weapons one final time, and looked at Emma. She stood straight despite her injuries, her hand on her daughter's shoulder, and there was steel in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet." Jonas opened the door and looked out at the coming dawn. "Thank me when this is over." He left the cabin and started back down the trail, moving fast now, racing the sunrise. He had work to do and not much time to do it. The narrow pass was a natural choke point, steep walls on either side, maybe 20 feet wide, about 50 feet long. Perfect for an ambush. Jonas set to work immediately, placing his charges at strategic points, running fuses, preparing firing positions. He was working on the third charge when he heard voices from down the trail. They were coming, just as he'd known they would. Jonas finished setting the fuse and scrambled up the rocks to his chosen position, a ledge about 15 feet up that gave him a clear view of the pass and good cover from return fire. He could see them now. 6 figures moving up the trail in the grey dawn light. Vernon led the way, moving carefully, his rifle ready. Behind him came Cyrus, his face and chest wrapped in bandages where the lamp oil had burned him. Then Cole, the 3 hired guns bringing up the rear. All 6 had survived the fire. So be it. Jonas had planned for that possibility. They reached the pass and stopped. Vernon held up his hand, studying the terrain with a professional's eye. Jonas could almost see him thinking, calculating, recognizing the danger of the choke point. "It's a trap," Vernon said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "He's up there somewhere waiting for us. So what do we do?" Cyrus asked. "Go around?" "No way around. That doesn't take a full day. And I'm not giving him more time to prepare." Vernon studied the rocks, his eyes systematically searching for Jonas's position. "We go through fast. Stay spread out. 3 of you go first. Me, Cole, and Ramirez will cover from here." The 3 hired guns, including one Jonas now knew was named Ramirez, started into the pass, weapons ready, eyes scanning the rocks above. They were professionals, taking it slow and careful, covering each other's advance. Jonas let them get halfway through before he made his move. He lit the first fuse and immediately moved to the second position. The fuses would burn for about 30 seconds, enough time for him to get clear. The first explosion was massive, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. A section of the trail simply disappeared, leaving a smoking crater. The second charge went off 5 seconds later, bringing down a section of the canyon wall. Rocks and debris rained down on the pass. When the dust cleared, the 3 hired guns were gone, buried under tons of rock. The pass was completely blocked, no way through or around without serious climbing equipment. Vernon stood on the other side of the rockfall, looking at where his men had been. His face was expressionless, but Jonas could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. 3 men down, 3 left, split by an impossible barrier. "Clever, Captain!" Vernon called out. "Very clever. But you used all your explosives. Now what?" Jonas didn't answer. He was already moving, circling around through the rocks toward where Vernon, Cyrus, and Cole stood exposed on the trail. He had one more advantage to press. They thought he was still on the other side of the barrier. He worked his way around silently, using every bit of cover. The sun was fully up now, painting the mountain peaks in gold and pink light. A beautiful morning for ugly work. He found a position that gave him a clear shot at all 3 of them. They were arguing. Vernon wanted to retreat and regroup. Cyrus wanted to find another way through. Cole looked like he just wanted to run. Perfect. Jonas raised his rifle, took careful aim at Cyrus's center mass, and prepared to end this. Jonas felt the bullet pass so close to his head that it tugged at his hair. His own shot caught Vernon dead center in the chest, the impact spinning him halfway around. Vernon staggered, looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then looked back up at Jonas with something like surprise. "Good shot," Vernon said quietly. Then his legs gave out and he collapsed to his knees. Jonas kept his gun trained on him, approaching carefully. Vernon's pistol had fallen from his hand, but that didn't mean he wasn't still dangerous. Jonas had seen men with mortal wounds fight on through sheer stubbornness, but Vernon just knelt there, one hand pressed to his chest, blood seeping between his fingers. He was done, and he knew it. "Should have gone for a headshot," Vernon said, his voice already weaker. "Center mass is what you always taught us. Biggest target most likely to hit. But it doesn't always drop a man right away." Jonas knelt down beside him, still wary. "You want me to get Doc Henshaw?" Vernon laughed, which turned into a cough. Blood flecked his lips. "Doc's 8 miles away, and I've got maybe 10 minutes. We both know how this ends, Captain. From below, Cyrus was shouting, climbing toward them. Jonas turned, ready to face him, but Vernon grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Wait," Vernon gasped. Before he gets here, need to tell you something." Jonas hesitated, then holstered his gun and gave Vernon his full attention. "That story Cyrus told," Vernon said, each word clearly costing him. "About your family's graves. It was a lie. Made it up to get under your skin. We were never in Willowbrook. I recognized your name from the badges, invented the rest on the spot." Jonas felt something shift inside him, relief mixed with anger. "Why tell me now?" "Because," Vernon coughed again, "because it was a low thing to do. And because I want you to know, I hated you for years, blamed you for everything. But you were right. At that court-martial, you were right. Those men I killed, they were prisoners. They surrendered. I knew it was wrong even while I was doing it, and I did it anyway." "Vernon, let me finish." Vernon's grip on Jonas's arm tightened. "I've done terrible things since then. Killed people who didn't deserve it. Hurt people just because I could. All the while telling myself I was justified, that the world wronged me first. But the truth is, I wronged myself. I took one bad moment and made it define the rest of my life." He looked up at Jonas, and his eyes were clearer now, almost peaceful. "You tried to save me back then. Testified against me because you thought it would make me face what I'd done, make me better. I see that now. Too late, but I see it." Jonas didn't know what to say. He'd carried anger toward Vernon for 15 years, and now that anger was draining away, leaving only sadness. Cyrus appeared at the top of the ridge, his face twisted with rage, his gun drawn. "You killed him! You killed my brother, and now Vernon—" "Cole's not dead," Jonas said, standing slowly, putting himself between Cyrus and Vernon. "He's wounded, but he'll live if you get him to a doctor." "I don't care about that." Cyrus raised his gun, aiming at Jonas. "I care about making you pay." "Then do it," Jonas said calmly. "Shoot me. But know that if you do, you'll have to explain to Cole why you left him to bleed out while you settled your pride. And know that the whole town saw what you are, a coward who beats women and hides behind his men." Cyrus's hand shook, his finger on the trigger. For a moment Jonas thought he would fire, and there was nothing Jonas could do. His own gun was still holstered, and Cyrus had the drop on him. "Don't," Vernon said from the ground, his voice barely a whisper. "Cyrus, don't. He beat us fair. Let it go." "Shut up, you're dying because of him." "I'm dying because I lived the kind of life that leads here." Vernon coughed again, weaker now. "Take Cole and go, while you still can." Cyrus stood there, torn between rage and survival instinct. Jonas could see the calculation in his eyes. He could kill Jonas, but then what? He'd still be in the middle of hostile territory, with a dying lieutenant and a wounded brother. No support, no supplies, no way to get out clean. Finally, Cyrus lowered his gun. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Jonas said quietly. "It's over. You leave now. You don't come back ever. That's the deal." Cyrus looked at Vernon, who nodded weakly. Then he looked at Jonas, and the hatred in his eyes was palpable. "You better hope we never meet again, old man." "I won't lose sleep over it." Cyrus holstered his gun and turned away, starting back down the ridge toward where Cole lay. Jonas watched him go, his hand near his own gun, until Cyrus was out of sight. Then he knelt back down beside Vernon, who was fading fast. The light in his eyes was dimming, his breathing shallow and irregular. "You did good, Captain," Vernon whispered. "Saved that woman and her little girl. That counts for something. So could you have, Vernon. You could have done a lot of good if you'd made different choices. Maybe in another life." Vernon's eyes closed. "Tell me something." Do you think God forgives men like me?" Jonas thought about Clara, about the faith she'd had that he'd never quite managed to share. "I think if God forgives anyone, he's got to have room for men who recognize their mistakes, even at the end." Vernon smiled slightly. "Always were an optimist." His breathing hitched, stuttered, then stopped. Jonas waited a moment to be sure, then closed Vernon's eyes with gentle fingers. He stood up slowly, his knees protesting, and looked down at the body of the man who'd been his enemy for 15 years. "Rest easy, soldier," he said quietly. Your war's over now." He picked up Vernon's gun and emptied it, then tossed it aside. No sense leaving a loaded weapon lying around. Then he started down the ridge, toward where Cyrus was helping Cole to his feet. The two brothers looked up as Jonas approached, both of them tensing. But Jonas kept his hands visible, non-threatening. "There's a doctor in Elk Ridge Valley," he said. "Doc Henshaw. He's a good man. He'll patch up Cole's shoulder. But you ride in peaceful, and you ride out the same way. You cause any more trouble, the whole town will come down on you. You understand?" Cyrus nodded curtly, supporting his brother's weight. Cole was pale and shaking, clearly in shock. But he'd survive if they got him help soon. Jonas watched them start down the mountain trail. Moving slowly, Cole leaning heavily on Cyrus. Then he turned and started back up toward his cabin. Toward Emma and Sarah, his whole body suddenly feeling the weight of the past 24 hours. He was tired, bone-tired, soul-tired, the kind of tired that comes from violence and death and hard choices. His hands were shaking slightly as he climbed, the adrenaline finally wearing off. The sun was fully up now, bright and warm on his face. It was going to be a beautiful day. Strange, how the world could be so beautiful after so much ugliness. He found Emma and Sarah waiting on the cabin porch, both of them standing as he approached. Sarah ran to him, and he caught her up, holding her tight. "It's over," he said. "You're safe now, both of you." Emma came down from the porch, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for keeping your promise." Jonas set Sarah down and looked at both of them, this woman he barely knew and her brave daughter, both of them looking at him like he was something more than he was. Like he was a hero, but he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a tired old man who'd done what needed doing because no one else would. And maybe that was enough. "Come on," he said. "Let's get inside. I'll make coffee, and we'll figure out what comes next." They went into the cabin together, closing the door on the violence outside, stepping into warmth and safety and the promise of peace, however temporary it might be. Jonas looked at his rocking chair, at the fire in his hearth, Emma and Sarah sitting together on his bed, and felt something shift inside him. He'd spent 7 years trying to escape from life, from connection, from responsibility. But maybe that wasn't what he needed. Maybe what he needed was exactly this, to be needed, to protect, to stand for something again. He touched the badge on his chest, felt its weight, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise kept. 3 days had passed since the confrontation on the mountain. 3 days of recovery, of healing, of slowly adjusting to a world that had fundamentally changed. Emma's ribs were mending under Doc Henshaw's care. The doctor had made the trek up to Jonas's cabin on the 2nd day, bringing proper bandages and medicine, checking Emma's injuries with professional efficiency. He'd also brought news from the town. The saloon had burned to the ground, but the fire had been contained before it spread to other buildings. Cyrus and Cole Dalton had ridden through town just long enough for Doc to patch up Cole's shoulder. Then they'd left, heading north. No one expected to see them again. The other 3 members of the gang, the hired guns who died in the rockfall, had been buried in unmarked graves outside of town. Sheriff Tom Ridley had resigned in disgrace, and the town council was already talking about holding an election for a new lawman. Several people had suggested Jonas's name, but he'd sent word back through Doc Henshaw that he wasn't interested. Now, on this quiet afternoon, Jonas sat in his rocking chair on the porch, while Emma and Sarah worked inside, preparing supper. He could hear them talking and laughing together, hear the comfortable sounds of domestic life that his cabin hadn't known in 7 years. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face serious. "Mr. Jonas, Mama wants to know if you like stew. She found vegetables in your garden." "I like stew just fine," Jonas said. "Thank you for asking." Sarah didn't go back inside immediately. Instead, she came and sat down on the porch steps near his chair. "Mr. Jonas, are you going to come live in town with us?" Jonas looked at her, surprised. "What makes you ask that?" "Mama was talking with Doc Henshaw. She said you saved us, and the town needs someone like you. She said maybe you could be the sheriff again, and we could see you every day instead of you living up here all alone." Jonas was quiet for a moment. watching the sun paint the mountains gold and purple. It was a beautiful evening, the kind that made a man grateful to be alive. "I like it up here," he said finally. "It's peaceful, quiet. A man can think up here, but aren't you lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely is different from alone. Sometimes a man needs to be alone to figure things out." Sarah considered this. "Did you figure things out?" Jonas smiled. "Some of them, not all." Still working on the rest, Emma came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a towel Jonas had given her. "Sarah, stop bothering Mr. Reed. He's been very patient with us, but I'm sure he'd like his cabin back to himself eventually." "She's not bothering me," Jonas said. He looked at Emma, seeing how much better she looked after 3 days of rest and proper food. The swelling in her face had gone down, and though the bruises were still visible, there was color in her cheeks again. More than that, there was strength in her bearing, a resilience he admired. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you refuse Cyrus that day in the store?" "You had to know he was dangerous, that he might hurt you. Why not just play along, keep yourself safe?" Emma sat down on the porch railing, looking out at the same mountains Jonas was watching. "Because if I did that, if I let fear make me into someone who just accepts being treated that way, then he'd have won even before he laid a hand on me. My husband, Sarah's father, he taught me that dignity isn't something someone can take from you. You can only give it away, and I wasn't willing to give mine away, no matter the cost." Jonas nodded slowly. "That took real courage. So did what you did. Coming down from this mountain after 7 years, facing 6 armed men, risking everything for people you barely knew. That's courage. I made a promise to a little girl." "That's all?" "That's everything," Emma corrected gently. "Most people these days, they don't keep promises. They don't stand up when it matters. They find reasons to look away, to let someone else handle it. But you didn't. You stood up." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the evening deepen. Sarah had gone back inside, giving them privacy without quite realizing she was doing it. "The town council did ask about you," Emma said. "About whether you'd consider being sheriff. I told them I'd ask, but I wouldn't pressure you. This is your home. You've earned the right to live however you want. What would you do?" Jonas asked. "If I said no, would you stay in Elkridge Valley?" "I think so. It's our home for better or worse. And maybe now, without the Daltons, it can become the kind of town it used to be. The kind of place worth living in." She paused. "But I'd understand if you wanted to stay up here. After what you've been through, after what you lost, I can see why you'd choose solitude." Jonas reached into his pocket and pulled out Clara's locket, opened it, looked at the faces of his wife and daughter. He'd looked at this photograph every day for 7 years, holding on to grief like it was something precious. "I had a wife and daughter once," he said quietly. "They died while I was off being a lawman. I told myself I'd never care about anyone again, never let myself be responsible for anyone's safety. It hurt too much when I failed. You didn't fail Sarah and me, no, but I could have. If things had gone differently on that mountain, if Vernon had been faster or luckier, you'd both be alone right now. Maybe dead. That's a heavy weight to carry." Emma leaned forward. "Jonas, can I tell you something? Every choice involves risk. Every time we care about someone, every time we make a promise, every time we try to do the right thing, we're risking failure. We're risking pain. But the alternative is living like you're already dead, just waiting for your body to catch up. Is that really what Clara would have wanted for you?" Jonas looked at the photograph again, at Clara's smile, at Rachel's innocent eyes. And for the first time in 7 years, he asked himself not what he'd lost, but what they would have wanted him to do with the years he had left. Clara had believed in him, in his capacity to protect and serve. She'd polished his badge every week because she believed in what it represented. And Rachel had looked up to him, thought her papa was a hero. Would they want him hiding on a mountain, talking to ghosts? Or would they want him living, helping, making a difference in whatever time he had left? "I don't know about being sheriff again," Jonas said slowly. "That's a young man's job, and I'm not young anymore. But maybe I could come down more often. Help out when needed. Be part of the community instead of separate from it." Emma smiled, and it transformed her face. That would be nice. Sarah would love to see you more often. She talks about you constantly. Mr. Jonas this, Mr. Jonas that. You've become her hero. I'm nobody's hero. Just a man who did what needed doing. That's what heroes are. A Jonas. Just ordinary people who do what needs doing when no one else will." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Sarah called them in for supper, and they went inside together, into the warmth and light of the cabin. Later that night, after Emma and Sarah had fallen asleep, Emma in Jonas's bed, Sarah curled up beside her, both of them looking peaceful and safe. Jonas sat in his rocking chair by the fire. He pulled out his badge, the one he'd carried for so long but hadn't worn until 3 days ago. Marshal Jonas Reed, Wyoming Territory. The territory was different now, the jurisdiction long expired. But maybe the badge itself still meant something. Not because of what it said, but because of what it represented, the choice to stand up, to protect, to serve something larger than yourself. Jonas pinned the badge to his shirt, over his heart, where it had always belonged. Then he opened Clara's locket one more time, looked at his family, and made them a promise. "I can't bring you back," he whispered. "Can't change what happened, but I can honor your memory by living the kind of life you believed I could live, by being the man you thought I was. That's my promise to you. I'll keep living. I'll keep helping when I can. I'll be more than just a ghost on a mountain." He closed the locket gently and put it away. Then he leaned back in his chair and rocked slowly, watching the fire burn down to embers, thinking about the future for the first time in years. Tomorrow, he'd help Emma and Sarah make the trip back down to Elkridge Valley. He'd make sure they were settled safely, make sure the town knew to look after them. And then, well, then he'd see. Maybe he'd come back to his cabin for a while. Or maybe he'd stay in town longer than planned. The important thing was that he had choices now. The important thing was that he was living again, not just existing. Some moments change everything. A knock at the door, a child's desperate cry, a choice to stand up instead of turning away. That knock had changed Jonas Reed, reminded him that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. He'd answered that knock. He'd made that choice. And in doing so, he'd found his way back to being the man he'd thought he'd lost forever. Not the grief-stricken hermit on the mountain, but the protector, the helper, the man who stood between the innocent and those who would harm them. The fire crackled softly. Emma and Sarah slept peacefully. The mountain stood silent under the stars, and Jonas Reed, once lost and now found, rocked slowly in his chair and felt something like peace settle into his bones. He wasn't running anymore. He was home.